Chapter 11. Gabriel had been gone for hours. I knew it must be late at night now. But I couldn't sleep. I had paced my room in deep thought, my wolf's agitation preventing me from relaxing. She was angry that I had watched him nearly lose his temper and done nothing to stop it. Some part of me did feel guilty, but it always had a stubborn streak, and I still maintained that it wasn't entirely my fault. That she'd urged me to come here with him, and now he was giving me the cold shoulder. It was absolutely perplexing to think about the disparity between his actions when he came to save me from the vampires and his actions now. I had been the reluctant one at first. Admittedly, I was still a little reluctant, but I was willing to try to get to know him. As intimidating as the prospect was, if he kept acting like this, that would be nearly impossible. The selfish part of me wanted him to feel some of the turmoil he was putting me through. So far, Gabriel had gotten his way, mostly without protest, but I was sure how much more I could take. I usually kept my temper under tight control, but something about him kept me constantly on edge. The mating bond. You keep resisting our mate and it's unnatural. My wolf growled condescending. Right now, Achia's the one acting like he doesn't want us at all. I could tell the thought insulted her, but she knew it was true. For all I knew, Gabriel was going to storm in and kick me out of his pack's home at any minute. To distract me from my warring emotions the past couple hours, I had unpacked my bag of necessities, folding my clothes and placing them in the small wardrobe next to my bed. The bathroom was large and had a cabinet for my toiletries. Not that I towed around bags of makeup or anything. I usually preferred to keep my appearance natural, unless it was a very special occasion. The bathroom also contained a large foot tub which I was incredibly excited about. I loved baths and a stand-in shower. I couldn't help but be begrudgingly impressed that the Alpha House had so many amenities after hearing so many wolves talk about the savagery of the Black Mountains pack and witnessing some of their cruelty first hand. I had almost expected them to live in caves. I needed to try to forget some of my preconceived notions. I knew some were probably correct. The hostility I'd witnessed today was evidence of that, but others clearly were not. I reluctantly admitted to myself that I had to keep an open mind if this was going to work. I sat on my bed, sighing, and attempting to twist my frizzy mess of curls into some semblance of a bun. One glance in the mirror was frightening enough, and I wished it had time to shower before meeting Gabriel's pack earlier. After forcing my hair to comply, I glanced around the room. There were a few books to read, stacked on a shelf nearby, but I was too agitated to do so. And there was no tea. In my room, I narrowed my eyes, an idea coming to me. Perhaps this would be my chance to explore why there was no Gabriel around to hound me. Surely I could find out something about him by examining the contents of his home. He hadn't told me to stay put, had he? This was probably a terrible idea. Realistically, I accepted that. But if I was getting the cold shoulder from him, then I'd just have to learn about Gabriel through other methods. My mind made up. I stood abruptly and exited my room, leaving the door cracked behind me. The house stood still and silent, the hallway stretching out before me. For some reason I felt the urge to practically tiptoe down the carpeted floor even though there was nobody home. I wasn't used to the place yet, and it almost felt as if the building was holding its breath, daring me to explore. Or maybe I was just going crazy. I opened the door closest to mine, disappointed to see a mostly empty storage closet. The door across the hallway was another bedroom, more simply furnished than mine. The room next to it contained another bathroom. I continued down the hallway, finding another bedroom, another bathroom, and the room closest to the stairs that had no doorway and looked like a sitting area. All the rooms were still and appeared unused. I was surprised Gabriel didn't seem the type to invite house guests over often. I approached the stairs, freezing in place as another idea came to me. My heart started pounding with nervousness. Gabriel had said that his room was on the floor above. I knew he may not appreciate the intrusion on his privacy, but my curiosity was nearly overwhelming me. I wanted to know what his bedroom looked like, especially since he was allowing me to stay there. Without further ado, I began to skip up the stairs with renewed vigor. As I reached the landing above, I glanced around with surprise. This floor was much smaller than the other two. On one side was a single door, On the other side stood a set of proud double doors. I opened the single first, gasping in surprise as the room's contents were revealed. It was clearly a makeshift library of some sort, with shelves and shelves of books crammed into every single space. Gabriel hadn't struck me as much of a reader, but this room looked more used than those downstairs. My nervousness rose again as I closed the door quietly and crossed the hallway to the double doors. This was his bedroom. I knew it. Stupid. 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 I mentally chanted. It was not my wolf berating me this time. It was the logical side of my brain. The curiosity. However, one out. I knew I'd be able to hear the door to the house when it opened and sneak out of Gabriel's room before he caught me red-handed, if it came to that. I also knew Gabriel would later notice that my scent was in his room if I went in there. I realized he would probably be displeased with me. But if he was going to make no attempt to talk to me, this was my alternative. Besides, I wouldn't take anything or disturb the contents of his room. Holding my breath, I placed my hands on the knobs and gently pulled them toward me, feeling a surge of wariness as I entered his living quarters. I blinked, eyes immediately fixating on the moonlight that streamed into the room from the gigantic set of windows on one side, giving the area a lovely glow. The bedroom had a beautiful view of trees and a small pond behind his house before the terrain rose, turning into rocky hills and crags before stretching into mountains in the distance. I briefly imagined waking up to a sight like that every morning, the mountains touched by sunrise, before realizing it'd have to be in Gabriel's bed to do so. Blushing at the concept, I turned away from the window. His bed was a four-poster like mine but larger. His room was done in a similar color scheme but looked much more lived in, although I was surprised to see he made his bed neatly. On the opposite wall from the windows was a fireplace, much smaller than the one downstairs, with two armchairs next to it. Near me was a large set of shelves crammed with books. There were two doors in the room which I assumed led to the bathroom and closet. I felt a bit awkward being in here without him knowing, and quickly pushed aside my misgivings. I had to be quick about this. My attention was caught by the built-in set of shelves in the wall immediately beside Gabriel's bed. The four shelves were dark. Polished wood looked expensive, but I was more interested in the trinkets adorning the shelves, especially the pictures displayed. Some of the built-in's content were boring enough. A few books and files that likely had something to do with the pack. On one of the shelves rested a globe. Next to it a small compass and some other items that I assumed were for navigation purposes. It was clearly more for show, as werewolves had excellent sense of direction. My eyes roved all of this in a brief instant before settling on the pictures. There were only 3 of them that I leaned in, trying to observe as much as I could before Gabriel got home. The picture on the left was taken from far away and was clearly a pack photo. My mate stood rigidly, right in the center, and it was obviously not his idea to take the picture because he had a half-scowl on his face. The expression was visible even from the camera's far distance. Wolves crowded in on all sides of him. Eli immediately to his right, smiling. The children sat on the ground at the forefront. I was surprised at the sheer numbers in the picture there. It must have taken quite a while to fit everyone in the picture. My eyes found the next picture. I smiled despite myself as I realized that it was of Gabriel and Eli, next to a third male wolf that I didn't recognize. All 3 of them were young. I guessed around 8 or so in the photo. Eli had a mischievous grin on his face, while Gabriel unsurprisingly looked much more serious. They were dressed in such a way that it seemed to me the photo was taken at a mating ceremony or other pack ritual. If the Black Mountains pack rituals were anything even remotely close to my packs. Lastly, I glanced at the third picture. To my surprise, it was much dust, i.e. odd than the other 2 and set back a bit, as if Gabriel didn't want it to be easily visible. I reached out and gently pulled it forward, blowing the dust away. I blinked in surprise. There were 3 individuals in the picture. On the left was a man that was indubitably Gabriel's father. There was quite a bit of resemblance in their coloring and stature. Like Gabriel, he had dark eyes and hair, although his features were broader, less regal than Gabriel's. The man was large and imposing with no trace of warmth in his eyes. In the middle was Gabriel. He couldn't have been older than 3 or 4 in this photo. What shocked me was his expression. He was beaming from ear to ear. He appeared completely carefree, which was obviously normal at that age, but I couldn't imagine seeing such an expression on his face now. I felt a pang of sadness at the thought. Holding his hand was Gabriel's mother. She was absolutely radiant. Her hair was light brown and parted at the center. It fell down her waist almost down to her waist. She had bright brown eyes and a curvy figure. Her facial features entranced me, because although she was obviously less rugged than Gabriel, I could definitely see the resemblance. They each looked almost regal, like some sort of royalty from times past. She clearly held herself proudly. Her smile, however, for some reason she looked slightly withdrawn in the picture, as if she wasn't feeling well or was upset about something. Frowning, I returned the picture exactly to its proper place. I wondered what had happened to her. She obviously wasn't around. Had she died? I was burning with curiosity but knew I wouldn't ask Gabriel something like that. At least, not yet. Judging by the placement of the picture, it was a sore subject. I backed away slowly, giving the room another once-over. I definitely felt like I was intruding, but I couldn't curb my curiosity. Talking to Gabriel was like pulling teeth sometimes, and this was much easier. Don't do it. My logical brain warned me again as I decided my next move. My wolf was surprisingly silent. Just as curious as I was, I crept over to the door nearest me, pulling it open to reveal a closet. I flicked on the switch, unsurprised to see that Gabriel didn't own a surplus of outfits. All of his shirts and pants were plain and inexpensive. Unable to help myself, I leaned towards the nearest shirt, taking a deep whiff and allowing his scent to invade my nostrils. Despite my conflicting feelings, his smell still had the ability to soothe me, and now I was smelling shirts in his closet. This was an entirely new level of awkwardness, and I knew I should probably go. I was about to turn and leave, reaching my hand out to turn the light off, when something caught my eye. It was a small black shoebox that was barely visible in a gap between his hanging shirts. Now a shoebox in a closet was unremarkable enough, but something made me hesitate. His shoes were on the far side of the closet. Why would a shoebox be here? And why was it hidden? Open it, my wolf instructed curiously. All frustration with me gone. Once again, logic and curiosity clashed in my brain. I chewed on my bottom lip, contemplating. That would certainly be intruding and would be a gross invasion of his privacy. What would Gabriel say if he found out I'd rifled through his clothes and opened boxes in his closet? But he'd probably be even angrier than he already was. Still, I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in my head, the voice that wanted to find out as much as possible. I knew I probably wouldn't be able to sleep until I at least got a peek into the box. Now look what you're getting yourself into, Skylar. This is wrong. So wrong. I mentally chastised myself as I reached towards the box. It was very heavy, and I clutched it to my chest as I settled down, cross-legged on the ground. This was certainly an intrusion. I shouldn't be doing this, even with my nosy wolf urging me on, wanting to know as much about her mate as possible. Yet despite myself, I opened the small box with trepidation. The first thing I saw was a picture. Face up. I grabbed the small stack of pictures first, setting the box back down. I perused the picture, wondering why it was shoved in a box instead of being displayed in Gabriel's bedroom. The picture depicted a man with chestnut hair and stunning blue eyes. Although his coloring was different, I again recognized the regally high cheekbones and straight nose that Gabriel and his mother had. Even through the picture, the man had incredibly piercing gaze. Looking into his eyes, I felt exposed and vulnerable. Something about the man just seemed. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Loban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Unnatural. I placed the picture back into the box, suddenly feeling nervous. The next picture was of a smiling woman with brown hair and eyes. Her expression glimmered with warmth and she had pretty, full lips like Gabriel's mother. If I had to guess, I would say the two pictures in the box were of Gabriel's maternal grandparents when they were younger. So why were they shoved in here? Disregarding my unease, I shuffled through the last few pictures, none of the people looking familiar or as if they were related to him in any way. Feeling creepier by the moment, I set the rest of the pictures aside and I peered back into the shoebox. I let out a small gasp of surprise as my gaze fell upon a beautiful necklace with a heart-shaped locket. The beauty of the trinket wasn't what surprised me. What shocked me was that it was made of pure silver. My unease grew by the second. Why would Gabriel have a jewelry item made of pure silver? A werewolf's greatest weakness. How could he bear to sleep knowing a potential weapon was sitting in his closet? I peered closely at it, but kept my skin far away from any contact. The locket glimmered with small gems, but I dared not open it. It had enough experience with silver as it was. I couldn't help but wonder where he'd gotten it. It didn't look like a lover's token, but still. I felt a sharp pang at the thought and brushed it aside. There was only one other item in the box. I hadn't noticed it before as it had been hidden under the stack of pictures. It was a large, white, stunningly beautiful feather. Avoiding the locket, I pulled it out of the box and held it up. The color of the feather was so pure that it made Gabriel's white shirt look dim in comparison. I wondered what sort of bird it could possibly have come from. It was shaped elegantly and incredibly soft to the touch. I ran my fingers across it, marveling at the texture. To my surprise, I felt a small tingle in my hand as I ran it across the feather. The sensation was odd and unexpected, the source of which I could not determine. However, my wolf was whining in the back of my mind, and my instincts told me this was no ordinary feather. I began to feel the urgency to put the feather back in the box and leave without further ado. I quickly did so, putting the pictures back on top. I wasn't sure what all I had just seen, but my wolf was telling me I needed to leave. I stood up abruptly and shoved the box back in place. Everything I had seen made me uneasy. It showed me more of Gabriel, but I had actually grown even more confused. There was definitely a lot more to his story than I thought. Perplexed, I made my way out of his bedroom. About half an hour after I'd returned to my own room, I heard the front door turn. Gabriel was back. I exited my bedroom and made my way back to the landing. Gabriel would probably notice my scent as soon as he returned to his room, but it was better that I was caught in there. I knew that there would probably be a confrontation about it, and I deserved it. It snooped in there and wouldn't be surprised if he yelled at me for it later. I leaned over the railing to the stairs, observing cautiously as the front door swung open and Gabriel strode in. He was coated with a light sheen of sweater detail, which I attempted to ignore as the smell was surprisingly odd. His hair slightly matted. His clothes stuck to his sweaty skin, and I tried not to stare at defined muscles beneath the thin layer of fabric. Although most of his agitation seemed to have ceased, Gabriel still looked tense. His unfathomable eyes found me almost immediately and he halted, staring up at me. The silence stretched out over a few seconds as I tried to find something to say. I realized that my anger from earlier had abated somewhat. I hadn't meant to set him off. Still though, his overreaction was a bit extreme. I would have to remember not to bring Will up again. Gabriel broke the silence. I spoke with Eli. He agrees with me that we need to test your fighting ability. You'll start tomorrow. I swallowed a bit nervously. I knew I was a pretty good fighter by my pack standards. But what would the Black Mountains pack think? I asked the question that I had been pondering for a while. Why are you testing me? Do you plan on having me join the pack? No wolf can go on living with this pack without being tested. I bristled slightly at the way he phrased that. Was being his mate not good enough? I felt a rush of determination to prove myself to him, even though part of me felt insulted that I would have to go to such lengths. With a twinge of insecurity, I thought that maybe my mate didn't think I was worthy. My wolf growled lowly at the notion. You were gone a long time. I decided to change the subject, not wanting to get into another argument. Gabriel didn't respond for a moment instead. He began to head towards the kitchen. Are you hungry? Clearly not wanting to address the earlier issue. Making my way down the rest of the stairs to follow him. I guess. I replied, somewhat sullenly. Why was it so damn hard to talk to my own mate? I felt like it was harder now that it had been that first night in the clearing. Gabriel opened a refrigerator, scanning the contents. He seemed determined not to look at me. Normally, one of the pack cooks takes care of the meals. He pulled out a plastic container. I caught the scent of chicken and my hunger intensified. Where are they now? I gave her the day off. I nodded aimlessly, wondering if he sent the cook away because I was going to be here. Gabriel swiftly transferred a few fried chicken breasts to a plate, pulled out some paper towels to cover them, and shoved it unceremoniously into the microwave without a word. Typical bachelor cooking style, reheating leftovers in the microwave. I thought wryly. I shifted from foot to foot, itching to say something. Earlier, I began, but he cut me off, turning to look at me. I resisted the urge to shudder under his heavy gaze. Don't talk about him other males. My wolf doesn't like it, he said shortly, turning away from me after he did so. I blinked, surprised at the admission. My wolf liked the idea of her mate being possessive, and I had to admit some part of me did too, even if he was going overboard. Okay, but just don't, he muttered. I huffed in mild irritation but dropped it, changing the topic. What happened in the woods earlier? Gabriel placed both hands on the counter. Sign. I scented a vampire. What? I stammered, feeling a flutter of fear. Although I was surprised that they were still following me. Why hadn't I scented them myself? They may have figured out where you are. Although a vampire could not have followed us here during the day, I've doubled the patrols again. He did not seem pleased. White owled and I smell it. Most vampires are much weaker than werewolves, physically. However, they leave almost no traceable scent. It is nearly impossible to track them. In that they have an advantage. I bit my lip, remembering the time I'd been watched in the woods but had barely caught a scent, and how I could hardly smell the vampires when they were in the same room as me. It made me nervous that I couldn't rely on my werewolf senses. It was then that I recalled with a jolt the names I'd overheard in the storage unit. I hadn't had a chance to question or even talk to Gabriel about it before, as we'd left for his pack village pretty much immediately after my father healed my injuries. Everything had been so hectic that I'd forgotten to share the information I'd gathered. Speaking of vampires, the two you killed mentioned another one, Antonio, and said something about Antonio having a master. Does that name ring any bells? Gabriel's eyes darkened, and he slowly shook his head. No, I always thought they were solitary. I got the feeling that there was more to it than that. How do you know so much about them? He turned his head slightly, and I saw his jaw clench. I was told about them. I was much younger. I was warned they might look for me. Why do they want you? I faintly realized that we were actually having a normal conversation, or at least a conversation without shouting. Gabriel's shoulders tensed. He remained silent. The seconds trickled by, but still he didn't respond. Gabriel, I asked hesitantly. Gabriel made a noise deep in his throat, almost akin to a growl. Don't do that. His voice had taken on a rough edge as he spoke. Don't do what? Don't say my name like that. He was gripping the countertop tightly. I was about to ask why, when my wolf's inner smirk clued me in now. I tried not to blush as I realized what he meant. I felt the tension thickening yet again. I was craving the conversation with him, wanting an explanation for my question about the vampires. But the microwave suddenly beeped loudly, effectively ending the conversation. Gabriel seemed relieved for the interruption as he opened the microwave and pulled the food out. The juicy scent invaded my nose, making my mouth water. He divvied the food out onto 2 plates, grabbing a loaf of bread from a bowl near the refrigerator. He opened the appliance again and pulled out 2 bottles of water. He set one in front of me and indicated that I grab my plate and drink. I did so, hesitating slightly before I made my way into the dining room. The table was large and expensive looking, but I could tell Gabriel didn't use it often. I sat down in the nearest chair, half expecting Gabriel to take his food upstairs and eat by himself. But to my surprise, he walked around the table and sat down across from me, placing the bread between us. To any outsider, it would have looked like a typical couple sitting down to eat. I looked down at my food and blushed. This activity just seemed so normal, especially for our unconventional relationship, if one could even call it a relationship. I registered Gabriel's eyes on me, and I slowly looked up to meet his gaze. "Eat," he ordered sternly, as if I were a small child. "Okay, bossy," I murmured under my breath and grabbed a piece of bread. I was somewhat nervous being this close to Gabriel, and I could feel my wolf's awareness at our proximity. As if on cue, my wolf began to push a few inappropriate thoughts into my head. I scolded her mentally, trying to get the lustful thoughts of my head, but I couldn't help but observe the way Gabriel's muscles rippled as he lifted the food to his mouth, all the faint scent of sweat that still clung to him. "Damn it, Skylar," I thought as I felt yet another blush creep onto my cheeks. Sometimes I hated my pale skin. It did nothing to hide embarrassment. A moment of silent eating passed, but just as I was about to attempt another conversation, Gabriel froze, his eyes becoming unfocused. I could tell he was having a mental conversation with another pack member. I let my mind wander as Gabriel had his silent conference. How often would we sit at this table to eat together? Would we ever get to the point where there's discomfort between us? I realized that Gabriel always refrained from any physical contact with me. It was difficult to imagine the progression of our relationship. He set his food back onto his plate, sighing, and I knew the internal conversation was over. Pack business. He stood up, looking resigned. The self-deprecating part of me wondered if he was glad to get away from the awkward conversation with me. Then I berated my own insecurity. "He wants to be here with us," my wolf said firmly, in argument with my insecure thoughts. I realized I was still sitting there, staring blankly at Gabriel as picked up his plate, throwing the scraps away. I wondered if this was a frequent occurrence. He had such a big pack that there was probably always someone that needed help. I felt a pain of sympathy for him despite myself. Alpha Brett always had a hectic schedule, and my pack was only half the size of the Black Mountains pack. Gabriel had a lot on his shoulders. He was exiting the kitchen now and heading towards the front door. For a second, I genuinely thought he would leave the house without a word. I felt a surge of sadness despite all of my reservations. I still wanted to be close to Gabriel, and I couldn't do anything about it. That was just the mating bond at work. Because of thoughts like these, I was surprised when Gabriel froze in the doorway, facing away from me, shoulders hunched. He stood there a moment, unmoving. When he spoke, his voice was even deeper than normal, and there was an undertone in his voice that I couldn't place. "The pack will come around. They're just wary of strangers." I blinked, surprised. So HED noticed the uncertainty and the animosity at the pack meeting. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "How do you know they'll warm up to me?" Hoping HED elaborate. There was a heartbeat of silence. I held my breath, waiting for his answer. It's impossible not to. So softly I could barely catch the words. An instant later I heard the front door to the house open, and Gabriel was gone. I sat there for several seconds, heart pounding. Had he really just said that? I couldn't help the warmth that had rushed through me at his words. It was probably the nicest thing he had ever said to me. I was also completely bewildered, as his words were totally at odds with his behavior. Gabriel was saying it was impossible not to warm up to me, yet he hadn't been warm at all, until he said that. I took a deep breath, trying to control my racing emotions. It scared me that one little sentence from Gabriel could elicit such a reaction from me. I finished my food in a hurry and disposed of the plate, my cheeks still feeling warm from my mate's words. I began to head upstairs towards my room, my mind going over our conversation over and over again in my head. It hadn't ended in an argument, thankfully enough. Perhaps we were making progress. If his pack came around, like he said, maybe he'd have an easier time being here. I still had to wrap my head around Gabriel and his multiple personalities, but I felt even more determined to get to know him now. Something told me that if there was goodness there, the hard work would be worth it. Half an hour later, I was bathed and clad in my night clothes, lying in the surprisingly soft bed. My body was tired, but my mind would not rest despite the fact that I knew it had to be super late and I wouldn't get much sleep. Aside from the thought that I would be sleeping in Gabriel's house tonight, although he wasn't back yet, I couldn't shake my nervousness about the day to come. I would be tested. That likely meant I would have to fight one of his trained wolves for practice. I desperately wanted to rise to his pack standards. I couldn't imagine the difficulties I would face if I was perceived as weak. I couldn't let these wolves see my fear. Trying to quiet my wolf, who was pining for her mate, I closed my eyes and willed sleep to come. I dimly registered a faint rumble of thunder in the distance. Despite the comforts of my room, I felt lonely. I missed my family and my pack. My wolf and I couldn't help but imagine being in Gabriel's bed, inhaling his scent as I fell asleep. I wasn't brave enough to creep in his room again, but perhaps if I got to know him well enough, I'd feel comfortable doing so. I quietly exhaled, forcing my whirlwind of thoughts to slow as it began to rain outside, the droplets splattering lightly against the window pane. As I began to doze, my thoughts were increasingly scrambled. The last wayward thought I had before I fell asleep was of the pure white feather and the beautiful silver locket in Gabriel's closet. Where had they come from? Chapter 12. Morning came faster than expected. Bright sunlight streamed through my window, falling upon my closed eyelids and awakening me from my deep slumber. I turned over, away from the sun's rays, feeling the pinch of nervousness as the events of last night came rushing back to me. Today was the day I would be tested, as Gabriel had put it. Hopefully that didn't tail anything too horrible and I could showcase my fighting skills. I could definitely hold my own pretty well back in my own pack. I slowly sat up, rubbing the tiredness out of my eyes. What time was it anyways? Blinking, I glanced at the old-fashioned clock that hung on the wall by my bed. 10:08. I was surprised Gabriel had not woken me up yet. He seemed the type to make everyone rise at the crack of dawn. My wolf wondered what it would be like to open my eyes and see him first thing every day, smiling slightly in my half-asleep state. I crawled out of bed and stumbled into the bathroom. All that running yesterday had definitely taken its toll and I had slept like a baby. I did a quick assessment in the mirror. My face seemed slightly paler than normal, and wayward curls were sticking out in numerous directions. I took a quick shower, not wanting to waste any time, brushing through my wet curls before roughly shoving my hair into a bun. After brushing my teeth and dressing myself in a loose shirt and shorts, I exited my room and headed downstairs. I was slightly disappointed to see that Gabriel was nowhere in sight and his alluring scent was slightly stale. It seemed he had left early this morning and hadn't bothered to wake me up. I tried to reassure myself that perhaps he was just being polite, although not his typical behavior, and allowing me to recuperate before my test today. I opened the refrigerator, taking out a water bottle and snagging an apple from the fruit bowl. What was I supposed to do? Did he just want me to wait for him at the house? Or was I supposed to go hunt him down? I chewed my lip in indecision. I definitely didn't want to loaf around all day. Aimlessly wandering around the pack village would be more productive than sitting in my room. However, I was sure the Black Mountains pack would take kindly to an outsider meandering about. I quickly finished the apple and took a few swigs of water. Thankfully, I had 3 large knocks on the front door, saving me from having to make the decision between staying or leaving. I hurried towards the sound and swung the door open. To my surprise, Eli stood there calmly, arms crossed in front of him. "Good. You're awake. The Alpha wanted me to come fetch you for training." His words held no room for argument, but he gave me a small smile. "He couldn't come fetch me himself," I muttered, trying my best not to sound petulant. For some reason, I felt quite comfortable openly expressing my irritation in front of Eli. Eli shook his head, smiling wryly. "She's always got a million things to do. Maybe it'd be better to say that I volunteered to come get you." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "You did?" You're the alpha's mate. And you seem nice enough. If you're eager to be around, I might as well get to know you better. I smiled, despite myself. At least there would be one consistently friendly face. Okay. In ready. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Stepping outside, and closing the door behind me, Eli nodded and beckoned for me to follow him. As we began our trek through the village, I inhaled deeply. The rain had obviously stopped overnight, but the fresh smell hung in the air and the ground was still slightly damp. A slight breeze tickled my skin. It was hard to be in any sort of foul mood with weather like this, but my slight sense of nervousness persisted. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Eli, slightly timid because I was unsure if I was supposed to call him Beta. He didn't seem to mind the informal term, but he turned his expectant gaze on me. What exactly will I be tested on? I continued the question. Basic ability, was his calm response. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Endurance. Your human form will be tested before your wolf. You'll likely have to spar with a pack member of similar age and stature. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I replied non-committal lie, my nervousness spiking. Would Gabriel be observing the affair? It's just standard for a new wolf to join, although it doesn't happen often anymore. It's been a while since one of our pack members found a mate outside the pack. He kept his tone neutral, so I was unable to decipher his feelings about outsiders. Eli furrowed his brow slightly as he continued. I'm not sure what all you'll go through. We've never been in this exact situation before. I'm sure it will be different for you than for the average wolf. I was sure if different was a good or bad thing. Eli had a point, though Alpha's mate joining the pack was not the same scenario as the standard road. We continued our walk through the village. After I let the subject of my tests drop, Eli began pointing things out to me. He indicated the long, flat building where the food was stored, the pack doctor's infirmary, and even his own house. I nodded with interest. Gabriel hadn't been forthcoming with the tour, so it was good to get a better idea of the place. Once again I was struck by the sheer number of houses. Because their home was twice the size of mine, I knew it would take some time to adjust. As we exited the main part of the village, the path narrowed and weaved around large boulders and groves of trees as the terrain grew slightly rockier. We trekked upwards as the path led us towards a large hill. After a few more minutes, it began to level out, and I could see the landscape laid out before us. The ground sloped down in front of us, giving us an easy view of the surrounding areas. We were at the top of a small valley. I'd thought we were pretty high up, but on the far side of the valley several mountains stretched even higher to the sky, and I was taken aback by their monstrous size. I could see a fairly dense forest at the base of the mountains, and the area closest to Eli and I was a decently sized, flat plain that led directly to the woods. I gathered that this flat area was where many wolves went to train, and the forest was likely a convenient hunting ground as it was only a half-hour trek from the village at most. Confirming my suspicion, I could see about half a dozen wolves in the flat grassy area. It looked like a couple of them were sparring while the others watched. The guys were shirtless, displaying their muscular builds proudly as they sparred, and the girls were clad in thin tank tops. Apparently I was overdressed in my baggy t-shirt. I felt my heart rate spike as my eyes roved the group for Gabriel, but to my surprise he was nowhere to be seen. I frowned. Was he not even going to be here to witness his own mate's training? Several wolves had noticed Eli and me at the top of the ridge, and as we trotted down the slope and approached the group, they all gave respectful nods and greetings to the beta, the two sparring temporarily halting their activities. I felt a few wary eyes on me, but I tried to ignore them. I glanced around to see what type of training was going on. To my surprise, there was no equipment around. Was it just simply sparring? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I didn't see an agility course set up or anything like that. Where's the alpha? Ella was saying as we came to a halt in front of the small group of wolves. A big, burly fellow stepped forward to answer. He had blonde hair in a buzz, cut and cold. Calculating blue eyes. Joey injured himself pretty badly on the obstacle course. He jerked his thumb towards the woods and I gathered that was where the agility training took place. The Alpha and Ava are with him. I assumed that this Ava person was the pack doctor. The injury must really have been as bad as Blondie, or so I mentally named him. Said if they needed a pack doctor's immediate abilities, werewolves healed quite quickly, so only the most severe injuries were immediately tended to. I wondered what exactly this obstacle course entailed if wolves were getting seriously injured during training. Each pack had different training methods. My pack had an agility course of its own, but there was nothing dangerous about it. How long ago? Eli queried. About half an hour. Beta. They should be back soon. Blondie's cold gaze fell on me, and he looked me up and down. Judging by the expression on his face, he was not impressed, and I resisted the urge to scowl at him. Is she supposed to spar? To my agent extraordinaire, Madame Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He asked gruffly, using me in the third person as if I wasn't standing right there. Yeah, but the Alpha wanted to witness it along with the others, was Ellie's response. Great. You'd have a whole audience. Although I was admittedly glad that Gabriel would be here. The blonde werewolf turned to survey the other 5 wolves, all of whom were staring between Eli and the beefy guy as if I wasn't even present. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, muscles bulging as he did so. Bree, you can spar with her when the Alpha returns. I immediately turned to my opponent, who nodded smoothly, but I detected the scowl she was attempting to hide. The girl, Bree, looked to be a year or two older than me, but she was of similar stature, though slightly taller. Her light brown hair was pulled tightly in a bun, and because she only wore a small tank top and short shorts, I could see she was quite toned. I couldn't underestimate her. You two will begin as soon as the Alpha returns and gives the orders. Blondie said straight to my ly, keeping his gaze on Bree instead of me. They will be sparring in human form, Eli added. Bree didn't look surprised by this. Nor did the others. Human sparring was much more common than sparring as our wolves. For wolf-inflicted injuries were much more severe. That was a much more advanced stage of training, but I had passed back in my own pack but didn't expect to begin with here until I was deemed worthy. Just then the rest of the group stirred, heads turning in unison towards the trees. I followed their gazes, my heartbeat increasing in anticipation of seeing my mate again. I did not have to wait long before Gabriel emerged. To other wolves with him, I felt a surge of irritation as I saw the redhead by his side. The same she-wolf from the pack meeting. Was she Ava, the pack doctor? All of these thoughts processed in a split second before my mind became quickly preoccupied. Gabriel was shirtless. My mate was shirtless. I sucked in a large gulp of air, becoming quickly transfixed as he approached. All werewolves had muscular builds, but alphas were the fittest of all. I had never thought of it before, but it was in the forefront of my mind now. I couldn't tear my gaze away from Gabriel's perfectly defined torso and sculpted ABS. My wolf just as eager as I was to drink in the sight of her half-naked mate. There were numerous lustful thoughts rushing through my brain. I couldn't blame my wolf for all of them. I was practically drooling as I stared. Look away. Look away. I repeated the mental mantra numerous times. I couldn't be caught staring. Not like this. With a Herculean effort I tore my gaze away, gazing into the distance as I felt that my face was on fire. That was completely unfair. He had to have known the effect he would have on me. On top of all of this, my wolf was starting to grumble in the back of my mind that her mate's torso was on display for all of these other she-wolves to see. I did not like that one bit, even though I was sure he shifted in front of all of them regularly. That thought didn't help. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Eli was greeting him, the others following suit as they saluted my mate with respectful dips of their heads. They began to discuss Joy's injury and condition, but I remained preoccupied with getting my impulses under control. I took a couple deep breaths. Was I just imagining it, or was Gabriel glancing at me every couple of seconds? I finally turned back to the others to see Ava, the unfriendly redhead, slowly leading the injured wolf away. He was limping pretty heavily. I thought I saw Ava looking at me from the corner of our eye before she left, but I could have been imagining it. Since that's taken care of, you all may resume sparring, Gabriel was saying. His husky baritone set me on edge even more than usual. He turned to the blondie with the buzz cut. Vincent. Vincent stood at attention. I told Bree to spar with her. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, he said respectfully. Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. I still couldn't look at him for very long. Instead, I kept my gaze shifting between him, Eli, and Vincent. Then go ahead. His gaze fixated on my face, and I luckily managed not to blush again. You'll spar in human form. The objective is to pin, not to maim. Vincent will tell you to stop if the pin is sufficient. I nodded, trying to keep eye contact with him but failing miserably. Stupid hormones were betraying me. Bree, holding her head proudly, walked a distance from the others and turned to face me. She stood there, shifting from foot to foot expectantly. I tried to swallow my nervousness as I followed suit. On my mark, Vincent said. He came to stand near us. I took a slightly shaky breath. Why was I so nervous? I had done almost this exact same exercise 100 times back home. Begin. I was lucky I had fast reflexes. Bree immediately lunged directly at me at full speed. Many wolves hesitated before the attack, but not she. I only had a split second to move as she came hurtling towards me. I decided to spin to my right as quickly as I could, throwing myself out of her way. She missed me by inches. Bree landed and turned to face me, a new hesitation in her dark eyes. She clearly hadn't expected me to move quite so quickly when caught off guard. We slowly sank into crouches, circling each other warily. I dimly registered Gabriel's tall figure a short distance away, observing our battle. My wolf was glad he was watching us, but I had to pretend he was there or I would be far too distracted. My opponent apparently decided that testing my sheer strength would be her next move, for she came at me again, this time faking a quick lunge to my left before spinning around and swinging a punch from my right side. Observing her body language, I detected the move and quickly dodged out of the way. I immediately countered with a couple punches of my own, a flurry of blows that she narrowly dodged by swaying from side to side as she backed away. Bree attempted to gain the advantage by turning, using her momentum to swing a roundhouse kick to my head. Thankfully, I had prepared for the kick, as it was a move I had used many times in practice sessions, a move I had used on the vampires, and a move I was good at. As soon as she shifted her weight, I knew what was coming. Although her kick was fast, I rapidly ducked and her foot was over my head. Before she could regain her balance, I threw an undercut at her ribs. My blow connected solidly and Bree winced, bending over slightly as she absorbed the impact. I pressed my advantage by swinging a left hook at her face. She caught my fist just in time, her arm trembling slightly. I had to admit she was fast. She swung her knee up towards me, and I had to quickly stumble backwards to avoid the blow. Straightening up, the two of us began to circle each other again. To other times we came together to exchange blows, and each time neither one of us obtained the advantage. I received a powerful punch in the ribs and a painful bruise from when I blocked one of Bree's kicks, and Bree misread my body language before one of my series of punches and received a blow to the face. Once again we circled each other. I was glad to know that I could at least hold my own with one of their trained wolves. I could sense the Black Mountains pack watching us with renewed interest. However, I also knew that pinning a wolf required taking them down to the ground. Neither of us had even attempted a takedown since Bree's first lunge. We were both just testing each other right now. I knew I needed to get her down soon before I received any more hits. She was being cautious now, and so was I, though I had a few seconds to think. So far I had put most of my energy into watching Bree's body language and dodging her blows, but I needed to go on the offensive. I could punch fast and hard when I needed to, although it left me exposed. If I could just get her off guard for even a second, I would bring her to the ground. It was a risky gamble, but I had my trusty roundhouse kick that I'd used on the wolves back home. They'd gotten used to my ferocious kick, but Bree wouldn't know that was my secret weapon. In an instant, I lunged towards her, bringing my fist towards her face as I did so. She quickly dodged as I expected, but I immediately swung my other fist towards her. Utilizing all the speed I continued to throw punches left and right, not really expecting them to hit, just throwing them fast enough that Bree would have to devote her attention to dodging instead of attacking. Her face registered surprise at my ferocious onslaught, as I had been on the defensive all game. She was quite agile, and continued to dodge my punches and even a kick here and there. She attempted to throw a few counter punches, but I spun around to avoid them. I tried not to let my frustration show. Most wolves would have been hit by now, but I didn't let her actively distract me. My opening came when one of my blows finally met its mark, colliding with a spot near where I had hit her earlier. Wincing, Bree spun around to my side and attempted a high kick at my chest to counter. Her kick was fast, but she was slightly off balance as she had not taken the time to absorb the force from my blow. I allowed the kick to strike me and I stumbled backwards as if I was caught off guard, although my movements were controlled. Bree, thinking she had the advantage and desperate to take me down the first opening she got, immediately tried to lunge at me, her body hurtling through the air. I spun to the side in a blur of movement, bringing my leg up in a roundhouse kick in the same motion. As expected, Bree was still slightly unbalanced from earlier and she had landed somewhat clumsily from her lunge. She tried to turn around to avoid my kick, but she was a hair too slow. My foot collided right with the side of her head and she staggered backwards, swaying in her disorientation, reeling from my blow. I seized my opportunity and lunged. She was unable to dodge me. We collided and fell to the ground, me landing on top of her and using my weight as leverage. In a flicker of motion, I grabbed both of her arms and pinned them on either side of her head, using my body weight to trap her lower half. I could tell she was still trying to recover from the kick to the head. Before she could begin flailing, I allowed my canines to elongate, lowering my head to the side of her neck with the flash of my canines exposed. Bree tried to lift her arms, but I used all of my strength to keep them pressed to the ground. She may have been just as strong as me, but in this position she was at a disadvantage. "Kind," I said quietly. In a real battle, the enemy would continue to struggle, but in sparring the battle was over as soon as the opponent's neck was exposed and all of their limbs were pinned. I heard Vincent's firm voice. I immediately released Bree, who finally seemed to have recovered from the blow to the head and was glaring at me with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. I scrambled upwards, dusting my clothes off. I could practically feel Gabriel's eyes boring holes into the side of my head, but I ignored him, still unable to handle seeing him half naked. I glanced at Eli instead. He had a small grin on his face and he gave me a nod. "It seems you have some hand-to-hand combat experience," Vincent said begrudgingly, actually addressing me for once. "Come on, you two." Back to the others. I nodded. Bree, ignoring me, strode ahead back to the group. I couldn't help but hold my head a little more proudly as I followed her. "It seems so," Gabriel said. I dared glance at him to find him staring at me intently. His expression was mostly unreadable, but if I wasn't mistaken there was a hint of admiration. Was that actually pride in his expression, however slight? I felt warmth blossom inside of me at the thought of my mate being proud of me. However, he quickly masked the expression before resuming his usual look of indifference. "Satisfied?" he asked coolly without looking at Vincent. Vincent nodded, but he still had a scowl on his features. "Yes, Alpha. Are we moving to agility training now?" Gabriel kept his dark eyes on me the whole time Vincent spoke to him. I felt my gaze locked with my mate's as if I was frozen in place. For a few seconds it was as if only the two of us were out there on that training field. I felt the electricity sparking between us, my body and Wolf on full alert, aware of the half-naked man in front of us. After a few more drawn-out seconds in which I felt that all the wolves could see the tension between us, I finally broke the eye contact and Gabriel turned back to the others. "Well, leave the obstacle course for tomorrow. Today I want you to show her the west quadrant of our land. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm." It seemed that the last thing Vincent wanted to do was give me a tour, but he was too intimidated by Gabriel to say so. If she's going to be joining us, she needs to know the layout of the land she'll be living on. You were due on patrol anyways. Take another with you. I felt a prickle of irritation that they weren't using my name, but it would be nice to learn some new territory. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Are you sure you want us to go now? Vincent was clearly trying to avoid spending time with me. Apparently it'd always be on his bad side. Patrol will only take a couple of hours and I wanted to train. No, you will be going in human form, so it will take longer. I felt my heart sink at Gabriel's words. My wolf wanted to run. Vincent was staring incredulously. You wanted to test her endurance. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. This will be better. You can't communicate with Skylar if you're in wolf form. I felt my stomach flutter at Gabriel's use of my name, realizing it would be foolish to argue with Gabriel. Vincent lowered his head, sighing. Very well. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Well, leave now. Gabriel nodded, glancing at me once more. I felt my skin heat under his gaze. Vincent, be back before sundown. That's an order. At first I wondered why it mattered. And then I remembered the vampire Gabriel had scented in the woods. It wouldn't be safe to wander in a small group at night if the creatures were still lurking about. The thought deeply disturbed me. With one last look at me, Gabriel Beck and to Eli and the two strode off. I felt a prickle of disappointment that he was joining, but what did I expect? He had packed duties much more important than giving me a tour, but we got to show him our fighting. My wolf said smugly. I smiled a bit at that. Sorry you don't get to run, was my reply. She just sighed. Maybe once they trust us. If that would ever happen. I wasn't even sure I liked them yet. Except for Eli. That hadn't given me much reason to like them in the past or present. One didn't become best friends with old enemies overnight. Several hours later, I was about ready to kill the man in front of me. I was back to calling him Blondie in my head again, as I'd been staring at the back of his stupid blonde head all day. Not only was I beginning to tire from running in human form and the ridiculously fat, his constant reprimands were setting me on edge. Hurry up. A pup could run faster than that. You aren't fit to join our pack if you can't even handle border patrol. You don't need a break if you're not taking a break. The jibes were definitely getting to me. Everything was worsened by the fact that he had chosen to bring Bree along, which definitely made things awkward. If we had been in wolf form I wouldn't have worried about the terrain or terrain, as my wolf could easily handle it. But as it was I knew my human form would be exhausted before sundown hit. I had a decent amount of endurance even as a human, but this terrain was extremely difficult to traverse. The one thing that made me feel slightly better was the fact that Bree seemed slightly out of breath too. Vincent was much stronger than the average wolf. He seemed to be one of Gabriel's led warriors. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. If he was training the others, he probably did this regularly. I, on the other hand, did not often travel so many miles as a human, and it seemed that Bree was in the same boat. We'd kept at it the entire afternoon at the same breakneck pace. My silent prayers were answered when Vincent finally called a halt. We slowed our jog next to a large stream. This is the edge of our territory on this side, and it is one of the key points of border patrol. We will follow the river for a few miles. The other side gets closer to human territory as you go along, so don't cross it. I nodded, to urge with him to speak. Fortunately, He let us rest for a few moments and drink from the stream before we resumed our trek. Slightly replenished, we continued along the stream, Vincent pointing out keel and marks in their territory. Despite my reservations, I had to admit the Black Mountains pack had some beautiful landscapes. At one point we passed a large, crystal blue lake that I wanted to visit sometime. It even had a small sandy area on one side that imagined being somewhat like a beach. Although I had never seen one, I imagined stretching out in the warm sand. My wolf imagined Gabriel with us. I pushed the distracting images out of my mind. I was definitely feeling the exhaustion as the hours passed and the sun began slowly descending in the sky. I was sure my cheeks would be lightly tinged from sunburn. Due to the relentless pace, we had covered everything Vincent wanted covered, and we were now starting to head back towards the pack as sunset was fast approaching. I glanced at Bree out of the corner of my eye as we jogged. Like me, she was covered in sweat, the liquid matting her hair and trickling down the sides of her face. My side began to dully ache, my breathing more labored. Every stretch of trees was beginning to look the same. Our last break had been a couple of hours ago, and I felt like I needed another one before I collapsed. I glanced up at the sky with trepidation. The sun was beginning to sink below the horizon as the time continued to pass. But thankfully I thought we were pretty close to the training area, so we had plenty of time to make it. I slowed my pace slightly, taking deep breaths. My lungs burned, and my t-shirt was sticking to my back with the sweat. Vincent noticed my lagging jog and glared at me out of the corner of his eye. We're almost back. I breathed out heavily. Can't we rest for just a bit? Vincent's scowl deepened. Alpha said be back by sunset. And it's almost sunset. And we're almost there. If I collapse now, we'll never make it back before sunset. I cowled and helped the irritation from seeping into my voice. My exhaustion made me brave. It was true. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelben, heartfelt thanks for her unfailing patience, enthusiasm. At this pace I was worried I wouldn't make it at all. I'm already moving slowly enough. I have a mate and a daughter urging me to come home. Lucky them, I thought irritably. Just go. Vincent. Bree chimed in, tiredly. I could tell her breathing was labored as well. I can show her the way from here. Just get back to your mate. I need to slow down too. Vincent eyed her for a moment, uncertainty crossing his broad features. The Alpha. It'll be fine. We'll be just behind you. Bree slowed to match my pace and I shot her a grateful look. Then Vincent hesitated before nodding once. Don't linger, he said shortly, then sped up, taking off. His broad form quickly vanished into the thick trees. Silence descended on the two of us as we slowed our pace to a brisk walk. I wanted to thank Bree, but she kept her face averted from mine, so I let it slide. I focused on my breathing, trying to get rid of the stitch in my side and the burning in my lungs. I hadn't run that much in human form for a long while, and I hoped it wouldn't be a daily activity. Vincent may be able to handle it, but normal wolves like me weren't accustomed to it. A few more minutes passed by, the only noises being our footfalls and the rustle of the undergrowth around us. I glanced up at the sky. The sun was quite low now, the last beams of light stretching across the sky. I really hoped we weren't far away. I was unfamiliar with the lay of the land and didn't want to be out here in the dark. Despite the fact that Bree was with me, Bree suddenly froze, cocking her head to the side and sniffing the air. I followed her actions, worried about what exactly she was smelling, but I relaxed when I caught the faint scent of another werewolf. It wasn't Vincent though, which surprised me. If Gabriel didn't want us out after sunset, I doubted he'd like other wolves wandering around. What the hell is he doing? Bree hissed, almost to herself. I blinked at her in confusion. She tossed me a wary glance over her shoulder before turning slightly, facing the woods to my left. She frowned in concentration for a second, and I guessed she was mentally contacting someone. I can't believe is out here. It's getting dark, she muttered furiously under her breath. I shifted from foot to foot, well aware that darkness was creeping across the sky. We had scarce minutes left before Gabriel would be angry. Seconds passed, then minutes, before I heard crashing through the undergrowth and a human from emerged. He looked young, likely in his early teens, and had obviously just shifted back into human from judging by the fact that his shirt was inside out and there were wigs matted in his dark hair. "What the hell are you doing?" "Riley," Bree snapped. The young boy winced. "I was hungry and nobody has let me hunt recently, so I just wanted to go out and catch a rabbit." He trailed off. Seeing Bree's angry face, his eyes flickered to me as he noticed my presence. "Is that the alpha's mate?" I shifted position, slightly uncomfortable with those wide brown eyes focused on me. I nodded in response, and his eyes got even wider with surprise. Bree ignored his question. "You know we can't be out after sunset." "Not since." She trailed off, obviously not wanting to talk about it in front of me. "I know, but no buts. Your brother would kill you if he knew you were out here right now. You're coming back with us." A petulant expression appeared on the young boy's face. "Yeah, but no buts," she practically yelled. Riley sighed, looking downtrodden, before he nodded. "Fine. They'll go back with you," he mumbled resentfully. "Come on," she said impatiently, grabbing his arm and practically shoving him in the right direction. The three of us set off again towards the packed village. The two of them walked slightly in front of me in quiet conversation, which might have irked me another time, but I was too exhausted to care. More of my attention was focused on the fact that it was dark outside and Gabriel would probably be pissed. Knowing my luck he'd get blamed for not having enough endurance. Maybe I could get Bree to explain how hard Vincent pushed us and how she'd been tired too. Plus there was this kid Riley that had delayed us a few minutes. Gabriel probably wouldn't like my excuses, but I didn't want him to be disappointed in me. Not after seeing the proud glimmer in his expression for a brief moment earlier. "I just don't see why," Riley was complaining, a petulant tone back in his voice. "Are you seriously arguing right now? Do you want to talk to the alpha about this? Because I sure as hell don't." Bree was responding. "No good. Then don't push it." Her tone was firm. "I'm almost full grown. I can take care of myself. Don't get ahead of yourself." I sighed and tuned them out, glancing aimlessly down at my appearance. My clothes were damp with sweat and I had numerous scratches and cuts from my trek in the woods. I was certainly not presentable right now. Being around Gabriel so much made me more self-conscious than ever. I couldn't help but focus on every imperfection and wonder if he would notice. I cursed myself for thinking in such a manner. I refocused on the woods around me again, knowing we would be there in mere minutes. I was absolutely exhausted, but tried to stay alert, at least until we were out of the fringe of the forest. Despite my best efforts to focus, I didn't see it coming. 1 second, Bree and Ryder were chatting in front of me. The next I felt a powerful whoosh of air, sensed a presence whizzing by me, and heard a sick squelching noise. There was a strangled cry from in front of me. Something warm and wet splattered across my face and torso, and I froze as the scent of blood permeated the air. I watched as, almost as if in slow motion, Riley's small body twisted in mid-air. My wolf senses immediately honed in on him despite the impending darkness, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was a gaping hole in his chest and his throat was torn open, blood spurting from the wound and standing out against his pale skin. Riley's glassy, lifeless eyes stared up at the sky, expression frozen in a half-frown. Mouth half open with the cry of pain, his tiny form collapsed into the ground in a jumbled heap, red staining the earth beneath him. The leaves in the tree next to us rustled as if something had just rushed through them. I scented the air and detected nothing, but the lack of traceable scent told me enough. Vampire. And then Bree began to scream.